Hello and welcome to another episode of TWIML Talk, the podcast where I interview interesting people doing interesting things in machine learning and artificial intelligence. I'm your host, Sam Charrington. Two weeks ago, we celebrated the show's third birthday and a major listenership milestone. And last week, we kicked off the second volume of our listener favorite AI platform series, sharing more stories of teams working to scale and industrialize data science and machine learning at their companies. We've been teasing that there's more to come, and today I am super excited to announce the launch of our inaugural conference, TWIMLcon AI Platforms. TWIMLcon AI Platforms will focus on the platforms, tools, technologies, and practices necessary to scale the delivery of machine learning and AI in the enterprise. Now, you know TWIML for bringing you dynamic, practical conversations via the podcast, and we're creating our TWIMLcon events to build on that tradition. The event will feature 2 full days of community-oriented discussions, live podcast interviews, and practical presentations by great presenters sharing concrete examples from their own experiences. By creating a space where data science, machine learning, platform engineering, and MLOps practitioners and leaders can share, learn, and connect, the event aspires to help seed the development of an informed and sustainable community of technologists that is well-equipped to meet the current and future needs of their organizations. Some of the topics that we plan to cover include overcoming the barriers to getting machine learning and deep learning models into production, how to apply MLOps and DevOps to your machine learning workflow, experiences and lessons learned in delivering platform and infrastructure support for data management, experiment management, and model deployment, the latest approaches, platforms, and tools for accelerating and scaling the delivery of ML and DL in the enterprise, platform deployment stories from leading companies like Google, Facebook, Airbnb, as well as traditional enterprises like Comcast and Shell, and organizational and cultural best practices for success. The 2-day event will be held on October 1st and 2nd in San Francisco, and I would really love to meet you there. Early bird registration is open today at TWIMLcon.com, and we're offering the first 10 listeners who register the amazing opportunity to get their ticket for 75% off using the discount code TWIMLFirst. Again, the conference site is TWIMLcon.com, and the code is TWIMLFirst. I am really grateful to our friends over at SigOpt who stepped up to support this project in a big way. In addition to supporting our AI Platforms podcast series and next ebook, they've made a huge commitment to this community by signing on as the first founding sponsor for the event. SigOpt software is used by enterprise teams to standardize and scale machine learning experimentation and optimization across any combination of modeling frameworks, libraries, computing infrastructure, and environment. Teams like 2 Sigma rely on SigOpt software to realize better modeling results much faster than previously possible. Of course, to fully grasp its potential, it's best to try it yourself. And this is why SigOpt is offering you an exclusive opportunity to try their product on some of your toughest modeling problems for free. To learn about and take advantage of this offer, visit twimlai.com/SigOpt. And now, on to the show. All right, everyone. I am here in San Francisco, and I am with Matt Adereth, who is a managing director at 2 Sigma Investments, and Scott Clark. Scott is the founder and CEO at SigOpt and has been on this show previously. Matt and Scott, welcome to This Week in Machine Learning and AI.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Awesome. So I'm really excited about diving into this conversation. We'll be talking about 2 Sigma's journey with regard to building out its modeling and machine learning platform. Matt, you've not been on the show before. Would love to hear a little bit about your background, how you got started working in machine learning and at this intersection of engineering and modeling.
Yeah, it's always been an area that I've been interested in, the intersection of computer science and math. That's what I studied at Carnegie Mellon. And I always wanted to find some place where I could apply both of those disciplines and learn and grow in those. So after school, I went to Microsoft, where I was there for about 4 years working on Office, which there wasn't so much math there, unfortunately, but it was very interesting. And then I left Microsoft to join a startup that was spun out of Microsoft Research, where I was doing a lot of analytics on social networks. And I realized that I wanted to be at a place where I'd be able to do the math that I had learned and loved. And the thing that occurred to me was that finance would be a great place to do that because they exist at that intersection of math and computer science. And then the whole world of finance was also very interesting to me. So about 12 years ago, I joined Two Sigma. It was much smaller then. But I started working on tools and infrastructure there for analyzing data and have really helped build out the platform that we have today.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely be coming back to that. But before we do, Scott, give us a refresher about your background and what SigOpt is up to.
Yeah, definitely. So SigOpt provides an experimentation and optimization platform that can bolt on top of platforms like we're talking about today, and really help amplify and accelerate the way that you get to impact from these modelers. I came to this via grad school, where basically when I was doing my PhD at Cornell, I saw that experimentation and optimization was a core part of every project anyone in my department was doing. That was reinforced when I went to Yelp and worked on the advertising system, and so decided to build SigOpt to help solve this problem in an enterprise way for universities, government agencies, and firms like Two Sigma around the world today.
So, Matt, you started at Two Sigma 12 years ago, you said?
Yes.
Where was Two Sigma kind of in the journey of a platform? You started there working on tools and infrastructure as opposed to coming over from data science. Were you one of the first people working on tools and infra, or was there already an established group focused on that?
So there were teams working on it, but it was really more spread across the teams. Like we had a data engineering team, and there was a modeling engineering team, but they would each build out their own infrastructure of varying qualities, and it was a little later that we started really trying to find the solution that would work for everyone. But since the beginning, the company was founded in 2001, and it was started as a quantitative investment manager with a focus on building out platforms for the things that we were trying to do, with the knowledge that we would try to expand into different businesses, and then we'd want to be able to leverage the solutions that we had already built. So it was already in play when I got there 12 years ago, and it was more just like picking up the torch on certain areas that needed more focus.
Okay. And so maybe talk a little bit about the various constituents you serve. Do you have a single type of data scientist or a single type of skill set there? Do you have engineers as well as data scientists, as well as other types of quantitative folks that are using the tools that you're building?
Yeah, so it really is a wide variety of skill sets that we're trying to serve. Even within our modeling discipline, there are some folks who are much more technical and are looking at things from a technique perspective. And then there are other folks who are much more focused on understanding their data sets and trying to figure out what the predictive value is based off of a deep understanding of where the data comes from and what it means.
And roughly how many users does your group support?
So the company is roughly a third modeling. So talking around 500.
Wow. Okay. And so I guess what I'm curious most about is how the thinking about building out tools and platforms to support modeling has evolved over the time that you've been there.
So one of the things that we try to do is not be prescriptive about the tools that our modelers use. We want to hire the best, and we want them to be able to apply the tools and techniques that they are familiar with and that they are able to leverage the most. So that's a challenge when we're trying to build up platforms, because if we're not being prescriptive, we can't really limit them. But what we try to do is identify the common threads that will benefit the most number of people. We also try to identify what we think are going to be the winners in terms of technologies, where we can give them a little bit more of a push or support them a little bit more to make those extra easy to drive people to them without being prescriptive.
How did SigOpt come into play? How did you find one another? Was there a search around Sigmas and what companies can we find?
Well, we definitely ran into each other at a lot of the similar academic conferences that we go to and publish, whether it's ICML, NeurIPS, that kind of thing. But I think a lot of it, after seeing each other, what drove us together was this shared desire to be very modeling driven and really help augment and amplify these experts. So it's not about, again, being prescriptive, like Matt said. It's more about giving them the tools to run as fast as they can once they've picked a direction. And so you want to be able to unify and standardize on things that make sense to standardize on, but then don't do it in a constraining way. So you want to provide optionality so that they can use their expertise, that context awareness, that domain expertise, but at the end of the day, really run as fast as possible. And I think modeling platforms help with that, and agnostic optimization helps with that, and good infrastructure helps with that, but it's really about really empowering these people, which is that shared vision I think we both have.
Matt, when you think about the kind of end-to-end modeling platform that your team is offering, how do you articulate the various components of that? When I think about these kinds of platforms, I tend to think of them in terms of data management and transformation and those kinds of things, experiment management and production or model deployment. Do you have a similar view of the landscape, or do you organize things differently?
At a high level, that's how we look at things. I would break it down a little bit more. Even at the data management stage, we have a finer breakdown where there are things around like data ingestion is a big thing for us, because we have so many data sets that we take in. That's what we do is we try to bring in as many data sets as possible and find the value in all of them. So ingesting at scale is a challenge, cleaning at scale, and making sure that data is not just available for doing data science, but making sure that it's available for our real-time trading systems, which is an additional challenge because there is this timeliness aspect to how soon we process the data. Then on the research side, we break things down even further around not just accessing the data, but transforming it. Sharing transformations is a big concern for us, and then modeling.
Okay. And so then on the modeling side, do you have further distinctions within that set of capabilities?
Yeah. So the first part of the modeling capabilities is just doing the preliminary analysis of the data, like just exploratory data analysis that everybody does. We have a lot of focus on the time seriesness of everything. We treat everything as a time series. We kind of have this belief that everything is a time series. And if you have something that you think isn't a time series, you're probably wrong. And you're going to regret not treating it as a time series because it changes and we need to be able to do point-in-time simulations and backtesting for everything. So there's this whole phase of analysis and modeling. And then once you have something that you think has predictive value, there's this second stage of seeing how it trades. And that is really a different style of analysis than typical data science outside of finance.
You mentioned previously that some of the things that you're doing are particularly challenging at the scale that you're doing it. Can you give us a sense for the scale?
So I mentioned that we have hundreds of researchers, and they're each doing lots of different kinds of analysis at scale, whether they're doing the exploratory data analysis on large data sets or they're testing out their models and seeing how different parameters perform. In some of those cases, they may be running thousands or tens of thousands of very expensive simulations. So we have a huge huge demand for compute and a lot of challenges around scaling up to those, managing that amount of compute.
Scott, when you think about the challenges that Matt's talked about from a modeling perspective, I'm curious from your perspective, having seen this play out at a number of customers, what of what he described would you say is unique to Sigma, and what do you see broadly in the industry?
Yeah, great question. So I think broadly, we definitely see people doing unique modeling. They're doing differentiated modeling. There's something special about what they bring to the table, whether it's on the data side or whether it's the end application. And that's really, again, where domain expertise and contextual awareness plays a huge role. And whether that's in the asset management space or whether it's the work that we're doing with tech companies or the U.S. intelligence community, everybody has something different they're trying to solve. And what we've found is more and more companies are starting to invest in platforms, as of course you've seen with the series that you've running and are continuing to run. And a lot of that comes down to people were doing this already. They just might not have been doing it the right way, or they might not have been doing it in a way that could amplify across the entire organization. And we see the same thing with experimentation. So there's a lot of parallels in terms of just the core concept of we have data, we're trying to solve a problem. It might be making trades in a market. It might be trying to make a recommendation for a streaming service. But at the end of the day, it's somebody trying to solve this very specific problem. And then teams like Matt's and teams like SigOpt are trying to really just give them the tools to do those jobs better without forcing them into a sandbox or without trying to give them a one-size-fits-all solution.
When I talk to folks that are trying to provide these types of tools, the goals that they have are all over the map, right? Some folks have these broad, I kind of asked about the different types of users that you're trying to support. Some folks, their primary goal is to make machine learning more accessible so that more teams can make models, can build models, that kind of thing. Other folks are driving towards, their whole existence is around achieving some level of scale or kind of compressing the innovation cycle, things like that. How do you think about, your prime directives, if you will? What is really driving to Sigma to continue to invest in this? If you had to stack rank them.
Yeah, so the two things are we want to get better answers and we want to get them faster. We have lots of modelers, like I mentioned before. So any multiplier on their speed really adds up, not just because there's so many of them, but because of what each of them is doing is so high value. So the two things that we're looking at are getting better answers and getting them faster. So the better answers can come from applying better techniques that may discover things that couldn't be discovered otherwise. And the speed comes not just from the speed of the algorithms that are maybe doing these optimizations, but also the usability of the tool is really critical for us. It's very easy to lose a day to trying to figuring out some error message or some weird API that wasn't well designed. So that's something that we're also really focused on.
A big part of that is around, these kind of different elements of the platform that we've talked about, making sure the data is available to folks, making sure they can iterate on experiments very quickly. Do you have challenges on the productionalizing side as well, or are your users mostly focused on kind of analytical results and inquiry and not so much deploying models out?
They do deploy models. We do have our modelers own their models end to end. That's something that we think there's a lot of value in doing. And there are challenges in writing a production model versus doing something in research. That is another focus for my team, making sure that transition is as seamless as possible.
Mm-hmm. But a lot of the benefits that you described in terms of increasing the pace of innovation and kind of getting better results is focused on those researchers and their ability to churn through the possible solution space, if you will, for these problems that they're trying to solve. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so when you kind of think about the things that you've done to address or attack the experimentation challenge, can you kind of give us a spectrum of the types of things you've done from a platforming perspective to
to narrow in on those goals?
Sure. So I can give a couple examples. One is we focus a lot on the languages that people use, making sure that we have domain-specific languages that allow our modelers to express their problems really naturally, and while still having the flexibility to cover all of the possible ideas that they might have.
And what's the native modeling environment for your folks? Is it primarily notebooks or something else?
We've over the last few years, there's been a big push towards notebooks.
Okay.
We've open sourced some of the stuff that we've built. BeakerX is one plugin that we have that runs on top of Jupyter that allows people to work in a really seamless polyglot environment, and has some internal things that are bespoke to our environment that make it just really easy for people to do the things that they need to do. Another example of the kinds of things that we focus on to make it easy for them is around running lots and lots of jobs. Specifically, backtest simulations is a big focus for us. That's where a significant chunk of our compute is dedicated. So making that easy for modelers to interact with, to launch things at scale, to monitor and manage those things and to easily deploy to different cloud providers or using our in-house data centers. We just want to make that all as easy as possible so that they can get their jobs done quickly.
And what's the interface between the researchers and the SigOpt product and its capability?
That's a great question. We have a few different solutions. So there are many folks who use the SigOpt API directly. It solves a problem that lots of people have, and where they know that they have this problem. I have parameters, I want to tune them. We also have a number of tools that are for solving specific problems that modelers have that use SigOpt under the hood. So we really like that it works well as just a component in other tools where the modeler may not even know that they're using SigOpt.
Scott, is that a pretty common experience among the folks that use SigOpt?
Yeah, I would say there's different tools for different jobs, and it's about, sometimes it's a end-to-end platform that allows some flexibility for the modeler, and sometimes it's something where it's a very point solution for a very specific problem. I guess I have one quick question, if that's okay for Matt.
Yeah, absolutely.
As you start to build up these platforms, obviously you've been there for 12 years. You've seen a lot of different iterations of this over time. How do you measure the efficacy of some of your efforts? You guys have been on the bleeding edge for a long time, but I imagine there's been several iterations of infrastructure, of experimentation. How do you make sure you're making progress, or how do you kind of make decisions of what's worth continuing to invest in, what's worth building versus buying?
Well, we do have a lot of modelers. It is also few enough that we're able to talk to them and and have conversations about what they find useful. So that's something that we're always doing, is just interfacing directly with our users and understanding what they like and what they don't like. We do have tons of metrics. I mean, we're a quantitative investment manager, so we like to look at the numbers. We always are looking at things like usage, seeing how that's tracking to help identify where we should focus. And in some cases, it's not driven by numbers. It's driven by just keeping an eye out on what's going on in the industry, in the broader ecosystem of data science, and seeing what's applicable to us. And then we evaluate those things through experiments. So when we were looking at SigOpt, we compared it to not just the in-house solutions that we were already using, but also some other open source things. We looked heavily at GPyOpt as one of the big alternatives, and saw how it worked on a variety of optimization problems that we had identified.
And when you were looking at it relative to those other things, just curious, was there any particular, was it a performance, was it a performance motivation that led you towards SigOpt, or was it more of a user experience thing? And how do you weight those things?
Yeah, so it's performance, both the quality of the solutions that it finds and how quickly it finds it, but also the amount, the usability, and not just like, is the API sane, but things like how much tuning do you need to do of your hyperparameter tuning? We found that for a lot of other solutions, GPyOpt in particular, it was very sensitive to its parameters that you would set it with. So the fact that it wasn't something that we could just run and reliably get answers, and that it was something that you had to fuss with a lot, was another qualitative measure that kind of turned us off from pursuing those and made us go with SigOpt.
You need a hyperparameter optimizer for your hyperparameter optimizer?
Yes.
Sounds like a lot of turtles.
Yeah, the number one piece of feedback we got after I open sourced Mo at Yelp was, this is great, but you've taken my optimization problem and turned it into another optimization problem. But I guess, so you have 500 incredibly intelligent modelers, some of which have very deep expertise in mathematics. How do you decide for something like this? Obviously, you tried a bunch of in-house solutions. You looked at a bunch of different things. Like, how do you make that trade-off of, this is worth us spending up a team of 12 people and attacking it for years versus taking kind of a best-in-class solution? Like, how do you make that trade-off internally of, this is worth us solving internally versus this is worth us partnering?
Yeah, well, we looked at the opportunity cost. We have these folks who we've hired who are very talented, but we want them to be working on specific problems with the best tools that are available. So if there's something that already exists and it's a lot cheaper than us paying 12 folks a year to build out, of course we're going to go with it.
I'm curious about, certainly on the modeling side, a lot of, part and parcel to experimentation is, failure. You go down a path, it doesn't work out, you go down another path. And that's kind of inherent to the modeling process. I'm curious if there are any things that you can share from a platform perspective, things that, you tried, you were very excited about, they didn't really work out, they didn't give you the kind of performance or the acceleration that you were looking for.
One thing that I can cite that's relevant to this is we've been looking at black box optimization for a very long time. It's always been an interest of mine. I knew that it would be applicable to us. So it was about 7 years ago, I started an initiative to make some more black box optimization algorithms broadly available at the company that in ways that leveraged the rest of our platform and were just as easy as possible. And one of the issues that we ran into very quickly was when we started running things at a totally new scale that was required for doing these black box searches. A lot of the small pain points around having like running simulations fail, all sorts of things that just go wrong when you have distributed systems. A lot of those things just broke the user experience completely. And we had to table a lot of those initiatives around doing black box optimization to revisit our core platform for how we run all of these jobs and what the interface was, how we deal with things like failures, and just how do we make it work at scale. So it was kind of a pivot. We took this thing that we knew was a good idea, but really kind of failed because the environment wasn't right, and then focused on the environment instead. And then kind of tabled the black box optimization as a service because it was such a hard problem to figure out the platform, which took us years to build out and get right. So I kind of view that as something that didn't work out. It had these additional benefits, but it also set us up for success later on when something like SigOpt comes along that we couldn't have leveraged if we didn't have already experienced our own failures trying to solve the same problem.
Okay. And at the infrastructure level, are you now, having gone through that process, are you using something like a Kubernetes or some other open source, or is it a proprietary distributed computing solution?
Yeah. So when we started this, it was before Kubernetes was really even a thing.
Okay.
For a lot of the things that we're talking about, we were doing it before it really was a thing. Even the term data science wasn't really happening 12 years ago when I started, and big data wasn't a hot phrase that everybody knew. So our solution was built on top of Apache Mesos, which we built a framework on top of it. It has this nice pluggable framework interface. So we were able to build something that handled our bespoke scheduling needs. We open sourced it, our scheduler that we use, because we do know that there are other folks who have kind of similar problems, and there are benefits to us to open sourcing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you started before something like Kubernetes. You were using Mesos. In that kind of 12 years ago time frame, Mesos was the Kubernetes of distributed compute in the sense that it was very popular for these kinds of applications.
And we are investing heavily in Kubernetes now over the last few years.
Okay.
So, we're keeping up.
Okay. Interesting. And so you went down this path to build out some distributed optimization stuff. You ran into limitations of the infrastructure, and it sounds like you spent a few years building out the infrastructure to support kind of where you wanted the platform to go, or the kinds of things that you knew you needed to be able to do. Can you characterize how much of your efforts are spent kind of at the low-level infrastructure versus the higher level tools and services that are more researcher facing?
Yeah, so we do have our engineering org is also roughly about a third of the company, and it's broken up into several teams. I work on modeling engineering, where we focus on building out the tools and infrastructure that are targeting our modelers. There is a separate team called platform engineering, which is providing the platforms for all engineering and all of the company. So they're about the same size. I think modeling engineering might be a little larger. So what we find is that sometimes we will build out platform solutions to solve a specific modeling problem and then realize, oh, actually, this is more broadly applicable, and do a handoff to another team, to the platform engineering folks, which has happened with a lot of our compute specifically.
Mm-hmm. Did your team kind of identify this problem, or Kubernetes in particular, and kind of stand that up and then hand that off to the platform team later, or were they already kind of ahead of that curve, or were you at the same point in the curve?
No, so the initiative to adopt Mesos came out of modeling engineering specifically.
Got it.
When we were trying to solve this modeling problem of doing black box optimization at scale on simulations, and then it turned out, yes, this is a workable solution, and it is more broadly applicable. So we should transition it over to another org.
Okay, got it. And Scott, SigOpt has been doing some things with Kubernetes as well. Can you talk about that and the relationship between the work you're doing on the optimization side and the infrastructure? Do you see, in particular, other folks kind of express that same challenge where there are things they want to do to empower their modelers and their researchers, but they run into infrastructure challenges?
Definitely. We see this all the time where, especially if you're transitioning from a world where you're maybe doing manual tuning of a model, where it's an expert trying to do it sequentially in a notebook environment or something like that. Doing 10-dimensional optimization in your head is hard enough, but trying to do that maybe across 100 different workers is maybe impossible. But in addition to that being a hard optimization problem, it becomes just a hard resource management problem of SSHing into 100 different machines and making sure that they don't fail, like Matt said, and everything like that. So we're seeing more and more.
Are folks really doing it like that?
We've definitely had users where they want to take advantage of our ability to do high parallelism as part of our optimization suite, and we support up to 100 individual workers. And so I've seen users, literally SSH into a handful of different machines and try to they're using Screen to keep the sessions alive, and they're trying to do everything like that. And at the end of the day, you could be an expert in deep learning, an expert in modeling, but then all of a sudden there's this massive barrier of DevOps and doing this right. So We try to be active members in this community. We're contributors to Kubeflow. We've developed our own solution called Orchestrate that handles all of this for you as well. Take something that you might have written in a notebook, and then very easily you can containerize it up, pass it off to a Kubernetes cluster, and then SigOpt acts as this distributed scheduler for all of your training and tuning jobs. And we see this as, again, helping just amplify what these modelers are already doing. Like, again, you could be an expert in defining the model, understanding the data and things like that, but you don't want that barrier of parallelism, that barrier of distribution to be what prevents you from really getting to that best possible answer. So we see this as something that some people are building into their platforms. We see this as some people, individual researchers just want to be able to have this superpower, but we're continuing to invest in that, both in actively contributing to the open source community and building specific tools tailored to the enterprise that we can serve our customers with.
Mm-hmm. And across the folks you talk to, how do folks know when they need to transition from this, I'm going to do, optimization, I guess there's one, there's the step 0, I'm doing it in my head and I need to do it, programmatically, or I need to do it manually. And then, I need to do it in a more automated fashion. Like I'm trying to get how do folks come to terms with, folks that aren't like heavily investing in, platforms or optimization or some type of automation. Like, what are the things that you see like clicking for them that that motivate them to start investing?
Yeah. So I think it goes back to what Matt was saying around opportunity cost. And you can define opportunity cost in a variety of different ways. So for some firms we work with, it's about expert productivity. So we're working with a global technology consulting firm where when they rolled this out globally, every single team that was using SigOpt was able to complete their client engagements 30% faster. We're also working with a small startup that has 5 PhDs doing really cutting edge AI, and their founder says they think of SigOpt as just another member of the team because it's taken this burden of doing this manual tuning off of them. And so that expert time can be a massive opportunity cost. But also, just if the performance of your models matters, that's more opportunity cost as well. Because usually optimization of architectures, feature transformations, hyperparameters, it takes time, but it's usually also orthogonal to any of the feature engineering you're doing. So it's added benefit that's otherwise being left on the table. It's not about replacing what your data science was doing. It's about just adding to what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So that's another big opportunity cost. And then finally, it's time to market, it's compute costs, it's things like that. If you're spinning up GPUs and waiting around for sometimes weeks to get the results of something being tuned, cutting that down to days or hours can really change the way you do iterative modeling. And so I think it's really about seeing if you run into one of these pain points or if there's just a lot of opportunity being left on the table. Expert time, compute time to market, or just the value of these models that you're investing so heavily in.
Mm-hmm. Matt, are there particular types of models that are prevalent among your researchers? And from a platform perspective, are you building out specific platform capabilities to support specific kind of models, or do you think about the world more model agnostic?
So, like I said before, we try not to be prescriptive about what our modelers do, and we really do everything. Obviously, over the last few years, there's been a lot of buzz around deep learning, and it is something that we have been looking at really deeply. No pun intended, I'm sorry. And that is one technique where it really did turn out that we need to build some things that are specific to supporting that technique.
Mm-hmm.
So, well,
it is a pretty broad class of models or a broadly applicable technique.
Right. So we have had to invest into things that are targeting deep learning scenarios, just to even test out whether it works on our types of problems. And as we all know, hyperparameter tuning there is also a big challenge. So that's another place where we are applying SigOpt.
Mm-hmm. And was that something that just worked out of the box? Like, did you have to do anything special to apply SigOpt or any of the other things in your tool chain to deep learning, or was it did it just work?
There are challenges around getting the machines that have the GPUs that we want in order to use it effectively. So that was one thing that we had to change how we do some stuff.
And that to me sounds like infrastructure, like Kubernetes and scheduling and that kind of thing.
Yes.
Okay.
But as far as SigOpt goes, no. One of the things that we love about it is how well it works out of the box, and how easily it integrates with so many of our existing platform solutions.
Kind of looking back over the past 12 years, are there things that you would approach very differently, knowing what you know now?
That's a great question. So the one thing that immediately comes to mind is Python, and how dominant Python has become in the data science modeling space. That is something that certainly wasn't obvious back in 2001. It wasn't obvious when I had started. We've been a JVM shop since the beginning. So built out a lot of tools and infrastructure on the JVM for doing, not just for building our systems, but for doing the analysis that we need to do. So I would say investing more in Python earlier on, getting on that train would have been something that I would do differently, but it really has taken over for us. Our modelers come in. Everybody we hire comes in with that as their language of choice. The best open source libraries are out there, and obviously the deep learning world is dominated by Python as well.
Mm-hmm. So having had that experience, how do you apply that forward? Does that lead you to wanting to touch and try everything, or are there specific things that you now see were clear in Python and Python's rise that you can apply that pattern matching to other things?
I don't think so, but I think that the one change is that it's made us approach things in a more language and like platform agnostic way, or not relying on everything happening on the JVM. Because
you can't predict what's going to win, so you have to build something that's flexible and that can support lots of different things. It's interesting. I talk to folks that end up on both sides of this. It takes a lot more resources to support something that supports everything, right, than it does to build a very targeted solution and be prescriptive. But this is a great argument for not doing that, because you don't know what, we all pronounced, TensorFlow the winner without any challengers, and all of a sudden PyTorch popped up, right? And now it's totally reasonable to want to allow your modelers to use that if that's their preferred kind of interface. And that's just one example of how stuff, you think it's a game over and stuff just pops up out of nowhere.
Yeah, but that said, some of the platform agnostic choices that we make are actually, they're just the right choice to make anyway, or they have additional benefits aside from the being somewhat future-proof. So, for instance, data access and doing that through services where we're not having any expectation of what the consumer is an example of a way that we're adapting based off of what we've observed.
Mm-hmm. And so if you were talking to a team that has been doing modeling, has been doing data science, has achieved a level of success there, but is early on in thinking about, formalizing a platform effort, what kind of advice would you give to them?
Well, the world is so different now, and also a lot of those places, if they're just starting, they're operating at a very different scale from us. So the cloud providers and their solutions are wonderful, especially at smaller scales, but even in some cases for folks at our size. So picking one and really taking advantage of it and all of the services that they offer while being mindful about vendor lock-in is probably what I would say to focus on.
Yeah, when you think about the cloud providers, or generally about any kind of package offering, they often have kind of gaps that get in your way that can be hard to fill. Like, how do you balance that concern versus, kind of the ease or just kind of getting everything all at once? Or first of all, is that a challenge that you've had to kind of engineer around in the past? And if so, how do you kind of think through all that?
It hasn't been so much of a challenge for us because we have been running our own data centers for so long. So we've already got things working really well without all of the cloud provider specific offerings. So it made leveraging the cloud providers compute really easy because we weren't dependent on any of their like bespoke solutions.
But even more generally than cloud, there are a lot of folks that are a lot of startups and even mature companies that are trying to offer end-to-end, one-size-fits-all platform in a box kind of solutions. And the route that you've gone is to, at least in the case of optimization, identify a kind of a best-of-breed, focused, targeted thing and kind of plug it into some broader thing that you're building. Like when you think about kind of the role of that end-to-end, versus kind of building based on, individual things that you like how do you kind of parse all of that?
Well, because we've already been doing it with components, separate components, and haven't been leveraging one end-to-end solution, because nobody really does everything that we need. We like to think deeply about every step of the process and find the right solution for each step. So that's one of the things that really appealed to us about SigOpt, was that it really did target this one problem and solved it in a way that wasn't locking us into any particular technology before or after that stage. That really was a huge benefit for us. And then on top of that, the fact that it could be used on any of the cloud providers. It wasn't just one solution that was like trying to keep us locked in somewhere. It was also a big benefit.
And Scott, I'm curious if you have any perspective on that. I'm sure you get asked that a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, again, it's going back to standardizing where it makes sense, but doing so in a way that's non-constraining. So as Matt was saying, like, you don't want to spend all your time being future-proof, but you definitely need to recognize that the flavor of the month is going to change. 4 years ago, a lot of people using SigOpt were using scikit-learn primarily. And now we see a lot of TensorFlow and PyTorch, and we're already starting to see quite a bit of pickup of reinforcement learning, even in production, with firms like OpenAI that use us. Mm-hmm. And 2 years from now, it's all probably going to be different. Like, the landscape continues to change. And it's not just the landscape of tooling, it's the landscape of infrastructure providers as well. Again, 4 years ago, AWS was so far in front of everybody else that you didn't really think it twice. But now there's other providers out there. People use hybrid solutions. Firms like Dropbox are moving back off of the cloud for cost-saving measures. And it's really about saying, what can I bring to the problem? What do I differentiate? And then leave optionality everywhere else. And that's something that's core to us, being agnostic to the tooling, the infrastructure, whatever it is. We want to meet you where you're at and augment what you're doing, not try to fit you into a sandbox or lock you into something in particular.
Well, Scott and Matt, thanks so much for taking the time to chat about this very, very interesting topic. I appreciate having you on the show.
Thanks so much, Sam.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, that's our show for today. For more information about today's guest or to follow along with AI Platforms Volume 2, visit twimlai.com/AI Platforms 2. Make sure you visit twimlcon.com for more information or to register for TWIMLcon AI Platforms. Thanks again to SigOpt for their sponsorship of this series. To check out what they're up to and take advantage of their exclusive offer for TWIML listeners, visit twimlai.com/SigOpt. As always, thanks so much for listening, and catch you next time.